Sometimes the difference between life and death comes down to one person's courage in the face of impossible odds. What happens when a fresh-faced nurse, barely 3 months out of nursing school, finds herself holding the fate of America's most elite warrior in her trembling hands? This isn't just another medical emergency story. This is about a night that would expose secrets buried so deep that the FBI would launch a covert investigation, questioning everything they thought they knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of serving your country. When 20 bullets tear through a human body, survival seems impossible. When those bullets are found in a Navy SEAL who wasn't supposed to exist on any official mission, questions multiply faster than the blood pooling on the emergency room floor. And when the only person standing between that warrior and death is a rookie nurse who's never seen anything more serious than a broken arm, you realize that heroes aren't born from training or experience. They're forged in moments when ordinary people refuse to let extraordinary circumstances defeat them. This is the story of Sarah Chun, a 24-year-old nurse who thought her biggest challenge would be remembering which medication goes with which patient. Instead, she found herself at the center of a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of military command, where saving one life would put countless others at risk, and where doing the right thing might be the most dangerous choice she could make. The fluorescent lights in St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with their usual monotonous hum as Sarah Chun checked her watch for the third time in 10 minutes. 3:47 in the morning, and the emergency department felt like a ghost town. She'd been working the night shift for exactly 3 months and 2 days since graduating from nursing school. And nights like these made her question whether she was cut out for the intensity she'd imagined would come with emergency medicine. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum as she made another round through the eerily quiet corridors. The most excitement they'd seen all week was a construction worker with a dislocated shoulder and an elderly woman who'd fallen in her bathroom. Nothing like the dramatic life and death scenarios she'd studied in school or seen on medical shows. Sometimes Sarah wondered if she should have taken that position at the pediatric clinic instead. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay remained stubbornly closed, and the radio crackled occasionally with routine calls from other hospitals across the city. Dr. Martinez was catching up on paperwork in his office, and the other nurses were either restocking supplies or taking advantage of the quiet to grab coffee from the break room. Sarah found herself actually hoping for something challenging to walk through those doors, anything to prove to herself that she belonged here. Her wish came true at exactly 3:52 in the morning, but not in any way she could have imagined. The first thing she heard was the screech of tires on wet asphalt outside. Not the controlled approach of an ambulance, but something desperate and urgent. The automatic doors burst open, and instead of paramedics, 2 men in civilian clothes half-carried, half-dragged another man between them. The injured man's head hung forward, and even from across the room, Sarah could see the dark stains covering his clothes. "We need help," one of the men shouted, his voice cutting through the hospital's calm like a knife. "He's been shot." Sarah's training kicked in before her mind had time to process what she was seeing. She rushed toward them, calling for Dr. Martinez while mentally running through triage protocols. But as she got closer, her steps slowed. The injured man wasn't just bleeding from one wound. Dark patches covered his shirt, his pants, his jacket. There was so much blood that it was impossible to tell where one injury ended and another began. "How many times was he shot?" she asked, helping guide them toward the nearest trauma bay. "We don't know," the second man replied, and something in his tone made Sarah look at him more carefully. Both men were muscular, moved with precise coordination despite their obvious stress, and had the kind of alertness in their eyes that never seemed to turn off. Military, she realized. All three of them were military. Dr. Martinez appeared at her shoulder, took one look at the situation, and immediately began barking orders. Get him on the gurney. Sarah, start cutting away his clothes. I need to see what we're dealing with. Call surgery and tell them we might need an Orstat. As they transferred the wounded man onto the examination table, Sarah got her first clear look at his face. He was probably in his early 30s, with short-cropped hair and a strong jawline. Even unconscious and covered in blood, there was something about his features that spoke of strength and determination. But what struck her most were the scars she could see on his exposed arms and neck. Old injuries, healed but visible. This was someone who had seen combat before. She began cutting away his shirt with surgical scissors, and her hands stopped moving. Bullet holes. Not one, not two, but more than she could count at first glance. They were scattered across his torso, some still bleeding actively, others appearing to have damaged internal structures based on their location. "Doctor," she called softly, her voice barely steady. "You need to see this." Dr. Martinez moved to her side and went silent for a long moment. In his 15 years of emergency medicine, including a stint at a trauma center in Detroit, he'd never seen anything like this. He began a rapid assessment, his experienced hands moving quickly but carefully. "I count at least 18 entrance wounds," he said quietly, speaking more to himself than to Sarah. "Chest, abdomen, extremities. How is he still alive?" The two men who had brought him in stood near the doorway, and Sarah noticed they kept looking toward the windows and the entrance. They weren't just worried about their friend. They were watching for something, or someone. "What's his name?" Dr. Martinez asked as he inserted in 4-line. "Jake," one of them replied after a brief hesitation. "Jake Thompson." The pause before the last name was slight, but Sarah caught it. She'd learned to pay attention to details during her training, and something about this whole situation felt off. Not wrong, exactly, but incomplete. Like there were pieces of the story that weren't being shared. "What happened to him?" she asked while helping the doctor work. "Wrong place, wrong time," the same man answered. We were just in the wrong neighborhood." Sarah glanced at Jake Thompson's unconscious form. The muscle definition visible despite his injuries, the calluses on his hands, the way even unconscious he seemed coiled and ready for action. This wasn't someone who just wandered into the wrong neighborhood. This was someone who went into dangerous neighborhoods on purpose. As they worked to stabilize him, Sarah began to notice other details that didn't add up. The bullet's wounds weren't random. They were clustered in specific areas, as if whoever shot him knew exactly where to aim to cause maximum damage while avoiding immediately fatal injuries. The pattern suggested someone with medical knowledge had planned this attack, or alternatively, that Jake had been incredibly lucky to survive what should have been a killing spree. "His blood pressure is dropping," she announced, monitoring the equipment they'd connected to him. "He's lost too much blood," Dr. Martinez replied. "We need to get him to surgery now, but I don't know if he'll survive the trip upstairs." That's when Jake Thompson opened his eyes. Sarah had seen patients regain consciousness before, but never like this. One moment he was unconscious and unresponsive. The next his eyes were open and completely alert. Not the groggy, confused awakening of someone recovering from trauma, but the instant awareness of someone trained to go from sleep to full combat readiness in seconds. His eyes found hers immediately, and she saw intelligence there, along with pain he was clearly fighting to control. When he tried to speak, only a whisper came out, and she had to lean closer to hear him. Don't let them. Find me here." "Who?" she whispered back. "Who's looking for you?" But he'd lost consciousness again, leaving her with more questions than answers. Dr. Martinez was already calling the surgical team, explaining the situation and the urgency. Sarah continued monitoring Jake's vital signs while trying to make sense of what was happening. The two men who'd brought him in were having a hushed conversation by the door, frequently checking their phones and looking toward the parking lot. "We should contact the police," she said to Dr. Martinez when he finished his call. "This is obviously a criminal matter." "Already on it," he replied, but when she looked toward the desk, she didn't see anyone making that call. 20 minutes later, Jake Thompson was being wheeled toward the elevator for emergency surgery. The doctors upstairs had been briefed on his condition, and everyone agreed it was going to take a miracle to save him. 20 gunshot wounds was beyond the realm of normal medical experience. Most people don't survive 5, and he'd taken 4 times that many. As the elevator doors closed, one of the men who'd brought Jake in approached Sarah. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd first thought, probably in his 40s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Thank you," he said simply, "for what you did for him." "It's my job," she replied, "but I need to ask you something. What really happened to him?" The man studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decide how much he could trust her. Finally, he spoke. He's someone who serves his country in ways that most people will never know about. Sometimes that service puts him in situations where the normal rules don't apply. Tonight was one of those situations. "You're saying he's military?" "I'm saying he's someone who puts his life on the line for people he'll never meet, in places he can never talk about, doing things that officially never happened." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Special operations." The man neither confirmed nor denied it, but his expression told her she was right. "The thing is," he continued, "Jake wasn't supposed to be anywhere tonight. According to his official records, he's on leave, visiting his family in Ohio. If anyone asks, if anyone comes looking, that's where he is. But he's here in surgery with 20 bullet wounds, which is why this is complicated." The man handed her a card with only a phone number on it. "If anyone asks questions, if anyone who doesn't belong here starts showing interest in Jake Thompson, you call that number immediately." Who would be asking questions? People who might not want Jake to recover from his injuries. The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a physical blow. Someone had tried to kill Jake Thompson, and that someone might try again. Worse, there might be people in positions of authority who would prefer that he didn't survive to tell whatever story he had to tell. "What kind of mission was he on?" she asked. "The kind that doesn't exist," the man replied. "The kind that keeps normal people safe in their beds at night, but leaves people like Jake exposed when things go wrong." As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah's attention was drawn to the emergency department entrance. A black sedan had pulled up outside, and 2 people in dark suits were getting out. They moved with purpose, and something about their approach made Sarah's stomach clench with anxiety. "Are those FBI?" she asked. The man glanced toward the entrance, and his expression darkened. Maybe something else. Either way, Jake Thompson was never here tonight. Do you understand me? But the medical records, the surgery, there's going to be paperwork. There are people who can handle paperwork, he said. What matters is that you remember Jake is just another patient to you. Someone who came in with injuries, got treated, and left. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering in detail. The automatic doors opened, and the 2 people in suits walked in with the confidence of those accustomed to getting answers. They approached the reception desk, showed identification, and began asking questions. Sarah couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see the receptionist shaking her head and pointing toward different areas of the hospital. "I need to go," the man said. "Remember what I told you." "Wait," Sarah called softly. "What's your name?" He paused at the door. "I'm someone who cares about Jake Thompson. That's all you need to know." And then He was gone, leaving Sarah alone with a head full of questions and a phone number that connected her to a world she'd never imagined existed. The people in suits spent another 20 minutes in the hospital, talking to staff, checking records, and asking questions about unusual patients or emergency admissions. When they reached Sarah, she found herself looking into the eyes of a woman probably 10 years older than herself, with the kind of professional demeanor that made it clear she was used to getting answers. "I'm Agent Rebecca Foster, FBI," the woman said, showing her badge. "We're investigating a shooting that occurred earlier tonight, and we have reason to believe the victim might have been brought here." Sarah's mouth felt dry. "What kind of shooting?" "Multiple gunshot wounds, probably sustained around 3:30 this morning. The victim would be a male, possibly military background, likely brought in by associates rather than ambulance." Every word was an accurate description of Jake Thompson, currently fighting for his life in surgery 3 floors above them. Sarah realized that her answer in the next few seconds would determine not just her own fate, but possibly Jake's as well. "I've been working all night," she said carefully. "We've had a few minor injuries, but nothing like what you're describing." Agent Foster studied her with the kind of attention that made Sarah feel like every thought in her head was visible. "You're sure about that?" This would have been a significant trauma case, not something easily overlooked. "I'm sure," Sarah replied, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Is there something specific about this case that makes you think the victim would come here?" "We have intelligence suggesting that certain individuals might seek medical attention at facilities they consider secure or off the radar," Agent Foster explained. "St. Mary's has a reputation for discretion." The implication was clear. The FBI knew that this hospital sometimes treated patients who preferred not to have their injuries officially documented. What Sarah didn't know was whether that made the hospital a safe place for Jake Thompson or a dangerous one. After the agents left, Sarah spent the rest of her shift in a state of controlled anxiety. Every time her phone buzzed, she wondered if it was news about Jake's surgery. Every time someone new walked through the emergency department doors, she wondered if they were connected to the case. By the time her shift ended at 7 in the morning, she felt like she'd lived through a week's worth of stress in a single night. Jake Thompson survived surgery, but just barely. The surgical team had worked for 6 hours to repair damage to multiple organs, remove bullet fragments, and stop internal bleeding. He was moved to the intensive care unit under a different name, his condition listed as critical but stable. Sarah went home to her small apartment, but sleep was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Jake's face in that moment when he'd opened his eyes and whispered his warning. "Don't let them find me here." The urgency in his voice suggested that being found might be worse than dying from his injuries. She found herself thinking about the man who'd given her the phone number, about his words regarding service and sacrifice and official records that didn't match reality. Sarah had never considered herself naive, but she was beginning to realize there was an entire world operating parallel to the one she knew, a world where people like Jake Thompson risked everything for missions that officially never happened. The next evening, when she returned for another night shift, Sarah learned that Jake Thompson had disappeared from the ICU. Not discharged, not transferred to another facility, but simply gone. His bed was empty, his charts had vanished, and, according to the official records, no patient by that name had ever been admitted to St. Mary's Hospital. It was as if the entire night had been erased, except for the memories in Sarah's head and the phone number hidden in her wallet. She was beginning to understand that her involvement in this story was far from over, and that saving Jake Thompson's life might have been the easy part compared to what was coming next. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It started 3 days after Jake Thompson vanished from the ICU. a subtle sensation that made her glance over her shoulder while walking to her car after work. At first, she attributed it to stress and lack of sleep, but the feeling persisted and grew stronger. The black sedan that appeared in her apartment building's parking lot on Thursday morning could have been coincidence. The same make and model she'd seen outside the hospital, but there were thousands of similar cars in the city. When she saw it again parked across the street from the coffee shop where she bought her morning latte on Friday, coincidence became less likely. By Saturday, when it followed her route to the grocery store, Sarah knew she was under surveillance. She'd thought about using the phone number the mysterious man had given her, but something held her back. Using it would confirm that she knew more than she'd told Agent Foster, and Sarah wasn't sure she was ready for those consequences. Instead, she tried to maintain her normal routine while fighting the growing paranoia that her every move was being documented and analyzed. The breakthrough came on Sunday evening during her shift at St. Mary's. Sarah was restocking supplies in one of the trauma bays when she heard familiar voices coming from the corridor. Dr. Martinez was talking to someone, and the second voice made her freeze in place. "We need to review the records from Monday night," the voice said. It was Agent Foster. Specifically, any emergency admissions between 3 and 6 in the morning. "I've already provided everything we have," Dr. Martinez replied, and Sarah could hear the tension in his voice. "As I told you before, it was a quiet night. Nothing unusual. Doctor, we have reason to believe that a patient with multiple gunshot wounds was treated at this facility. We also have reason to believe that certain records may have been modified to conceal this treatment." Sarah pressed herself against the supply room wall, hardly daring to breathe. Through the crack in the door, she could see Agent Foster and her partner standing with Dr. Martinez in the hallway. The doctor's body language suggested he was trying to appear cooperative while revealing as little as possible. "Agent Foster, I need to be very clear about something," Dr. Martinez said. "This hospital operates under strict patient confidentiality guidelines. Even if we had treated such a patient, which I'm not confirming, we couldn't discuss details without proper legal authorization." "We have authorization," Agent Foster replied, producing a document from her briefcase. "A federal warrant allowing us to examine any and all records related to this case." Sarah watched Dr. Martinez examine the warrant, and she saw his shoulders slump slightly as he realized he had no choice but to comply. But then something interesting happened. Instead of leading the agents toward the records office, he glanced around the corridor as if checking for eavesdroppers. "There's something you need to understand," he said quietly. "Even if such a patient existed, even if records were created, they might not be complete." "What do you mean?" "I mean that sometimes when treating certain types of patients, especially those with connections to sensitive government operations, there are unofficial protocols, ways of providing necessary medical care while maintaining operational security." Agent Foster's partner, a man who hadn't spoken until now, stepped closer. "Are you saying records were deliberately falsified?" "I'm saying that sometimes the official record and the complete truth aren't identical," Dr. Martinez replied carefully. "And I'm saying that if such protocols were followed, it would have been at the request of federal agencies with authority superseding local law enforcement." Sarah felt her heart racing. Dr. Martinez was walking a tightrope, trying to give the FBI enough information to satisfy their investigation while avoiding directly contradicting the cover story about Jake Thompson never being there. "Which federal agencies?" Agent Foster pressed. "That's beyond my clearance level to discuss," Dr. Martinez replied. "But I can tell you that any such protocols would have been implemented to protect both the patient and the national security interests involved in his case." The agents exchanged looks, and Sarah could see them processing this information. They weren't just investigating a shooting. They were investigating something that intersected with classified operations and government secrecy. "We'll need to speak with the nurses who were on duty that night," Agent Foster said. "Of course. Though I should warn you, if unofficial protocols were in place, the staff would have been instructed to maintain operational security. They might not be able to provide detailed information." After the agents left, Sarah waited 20 minutes before leaving the supply room. Her mind was racing with questions about Dr. Martinez's carefully worded responses and what they implied about the hospital's relationship with covert operations. When she found the doctor in his office an hour later, he looked up from his paperwork with tired eyes. "You heard," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Some of it," Sarah admitted. "Dr. Martinez, what's really going on here?" He gestured for her to close the door and take a seat. For a long moment, he studied her with the same careful attention she'd seen him use when evaluating difficult patients. "Sarah, how much do you know about the kind of work that special operations forces do?" "Very little," she replied honestly. "Only what I see in movies." "The reality is nothing like the movies," he said. "These are people who operate in environments where normal rules don't apply, where a single mission can affect thousands of lives, and where the margin for error is essentially zero. Sometimes they get hurt doing this work. Sometimes they get hurt very badly. And sometimes they need medical care that can't appear in official records." "Exactly." Dr. Martinez leaned back in his chair. "St. Mary's has, on rare occasions, provided that care. Always with proper authorization from federal agencies. Always with safeguards in place to protect both the patients and the facility." Like what happened with Jake Thompson. Dr. Martinez's expression sharpened. "I never used that name. But that's what we're talking about, isn't it? The patient with 20 gunshot wounds who was never officially here. Sarah, there are things about that night that you don't understand, and, frankly, things that I don't understand either. What I do know is that helping certain patients sometimes puts medical personnel in complicated positions." Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Positions like being questioned by FBI agents who seemed to think we're covering up a crime. Something like that, yes. "Dr. Martinez, is Jake Thompson still alive?" The question hung in the air between them. Finally, Dr. Martinez spoke. "I honestly don't know," he said. "After he was moved from the ICU, all information about his condition became classified. I was told only that he was receiving appropriate care and that his safety required complete operational security. So he could be anywhere, another hospital, a military facility, or he could be dead." Dr. Martinez finished. "Sarah, the kind of injuries he sustained, the surgery required to save his life, the recovery process, it's entirely possible that despite our best efforts, he didn't survive." The possibility hit Sarah harder than she expected. She'd spent only a few minutes with Jake Thompson, but something about his determination to survive, his whispered warning about not being found, had made a lasting impression on her. The idea that he might have died alone in some classified medical facility felt wrong. "There's something else," Dr. Martinez continued. "The FBI agents aren't the only ones asking questions about that night. I've received inquiries from other federal agencies, each claiming jurisdiction over different aspects of the case." "What kind of agencies?" "The kind that don't usually get involved in local shooting investigations. The kind that handle national security matters and classified operations." He paused. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you told anyone about what happened that night? Anyone at all?" "No," she replied immediately. "I haven't even written about it in my personal journal. I was specifically told not to discuss it." "Good. That's very good, because I have reason to believe that your discretion might have saved your life." The words sent ice through Sarah's veins. What do you mean? I mean that there appeared to be people with significant resources who are very interested in what Jake Thompson might have seen or heard during whatever mission he was on. And those people might view anyone with knowledge of his survival as a potential security risk. Sarah thought about the black sedan that had been following her, and suddenly, her earlier paranoia seemed entirely justified. Dr. Martinez, what kind of mission could have resulted in someone taking 20 bullets and still surviving long enough to get medical help? The kind where someone was meant to die, but refused to cooperate, he replied grimly. The kind where someone might have discovered information that certain people would kill to keep secret. That night, Sarah's shift was interrupted by a phone call that changed everything. She was checking on a patient in room 4 when her personal cell phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Normally, she would have let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Sarah Chun. The voice was male, unfamiliar, and spoke with careful precision. Yes. Who is this? Someone who needs to talk to you about Jake Thompson. Can you step outside for a moment? Sarah's blood pressure spiked. How did you get my number? That's not important right now. What's important is that you're in danger, and I might be able to help you. Against her better judgment, Sarah found herself walking toward the hospital's rear exit. The voice on the phone guided her to a parking area behind the building where a different car waited. Not the black sedan she'd been seeing, but a nondescript gray SUV. The man who got out was not what she expected. Probably in his 50s, wearing jeans and a casual jacket, he looked more like someone's father than a government agent or military operator. But his eyes held the same alert awareness she'd seen in Jake Thompson's companions. My name is David Chun, he said, and Sarah's confusion must have shown on her face. No relation, despite the shared surname. I work for an organization that monitors federal operations involving Special Forces personnel. What kind of organization? The kind that exists to make sure that people like Jake Thompson don't disappear entirely when their missions go wrong, he replied. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The night you treated Jake Thompson, you became part of a story much larger than a simple shooting. How much larger? David Chin looked around the parking lot, checking for observers, before continuing. Jake Thompson was part of a classified operation targeting a human trafficking network with connections to several foreign governments. The mission was supposed to be intelligence gathering only, but Jake discovered something that changed everything. What did he discover? Evidence that the trafficking network was being protected by someone within the U.S. government. Someone with enough authority to classify Jake's mission and enough influence to have him eliminated when he tried to report what he'd found. Sarah felt the world shift around her. You're saying that someone in our own government tried to have him killed? I'm saying that Jake Thompson was set up. His mission was compromised before it began, and he was sent into a situation designed to ensure he wouldn't survive to tell what he'd learned. But he did survive, thanks to you, David Chin said. And that's why you're in danger now. The people who tried to kill Jake know he received medical treatment. They know someone helped save his life. They're working to identify everyone who was involved in his care. Sarah thought about Agent Foster's questions, about the black sedan that had been following her, about Dr. Martinez's carefully worded responses. The FBI agents who came to the hospital may or may not be legitimate FBI, David Chin finished. It's entirely possible that the people hunting Jake have enough influence to impersonate federal agents or even have real agents unknowingly working on their behalf. Then, who can I trust? Right now, very few people. He handed her a different phone, a basic model that looked like it had never been used. This is encrypted and untraceable. I'll contact you through this device when it's safe to talk. Don't use your regular phone for anything sensitive. What about my job? My normal life? Continue your regular routines as much as possible, but be aware that you're being watched. If anything unusual happens, if anyone approaches you with questions about that night, if you feel threatened in any way, use the panic button on this phone. Sarah looked at the device in her hands. It felt heavy, weighted with implications she was still trying to understand. Is Jake Thompson still alive? She asked. Yes, Davidson replied. But he's not safe, and neither are you. The people who try to kill him won't hesitate to eliminate anyone they perceive as a threat to their security. What do they want? They want Jake Thompson dead, and they want any evidence of their involvement in the trafficking network destroyed. Unfortunately, Jake's testimony isn't the only evidence. There are documents, recordings, witness statements, the kind of evidence that could bring down powerful people and expose operations that were never supposed to see daylight. Sarah realized she was trembling. I just wanted to save someone's life. I never wanted to be part of a conspiracy. None of us did, Davidson said gently. But sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary situations, and they have to decide whether to look the other way or stand up for what's right. What happens if I choose to look the other way? Then Jake Thompson dies, the trafficking network continues operating, and the people protecting them continue to abuse their power. But you go back to your normal life, at least until they decide you know too much to be allowed to live. The choice, when presented so starkly, wasn't really a choice at all. What do you need me to do? Sarah asked. For now, just be careful and be ready. Jake is going to need medical support during his recovery, and when the time comes, you might be the only person he can trust to provide it. When will that be? Soon, Davidson replied. Sooner than any of us would like. As Sarah drove home that night, she kept checking her rearview mirror for signs of surveillance. The black sedan was nowhere to be seen, but she no longer found that comforting. If Davidson was right, the people hunting Jake Thompson had resources and influence that made traditional surveillance unnecessary. Back in her apartment, Sarah found herself staring at the encrypted phone and thinking about the path her life had taken in just 1 week. 7 days ago, her biggest worry was whether she was competent enough to handle emergency nursing. Now she was part of a shadow war between forces she barely understood, holding the key to a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. She thought about Jake Thompson, somewhere in hiding, recovering from injuries that should have killed him. She thought about the evidence he carried, information important enough that powerful people were willing to commit murder to keep it secret. And she thought about her own role in this story, no longer just a nurse who had happened to be working the night shift when a wounded warrior stumbled through the hospital doors. The phone buzzed once, a message from Davidson. Safe house compromised. Jake Thompson mobile. Situation escalating. Be ready. Sarah stared at the message until the screen went dark, knowing that whatever came next would test every assumption she'd ever held about duty, courage, and the price of doing the right thing. The quiet life she'd built for herself was over, replaced by something much more dangerous and infinitely more important. Outside her window, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its shadows, a wounded Navy SEAL was fighting not just for his life, but for the truth about a conspiracy that threatened to shake the foundations of trust between citizens and their government. And Sarah Chun, rookie nurse with 3 months of experience, had somehow become one of the few people standing between Jake Thompson and the forces determined to silence him forever. The encrypted phone woke Sarah at 4 in the morning with a message that made her heart race. Emergency. Jake needs immediate medical attention. Can you meet us at the abandoned warehouse on Pier 47 in 1 hour? Come alone and bring whatever medical supplies you can carry." Sarah stared at the message, her mind immediately calculating what she could reasonably take from the hospital without raising suspicions. Antibiotics, pain medication, surgical supplies for fluids. The list was extensive, and most of it would require explanations she couldn't give. But as she thought about Jake Thompson bleeding out in some cold warehouse while his enemies closed in, the risk seemed manageable compared to the alternative. She dressed quickly and made her way to St. Mary's through empty pre-dawn streets. Using her access card, she entered through the staff entrance and made her way to the supply rooms. Her hands shook slightly as she filled a large gym bag with everything she thought might be needed for emergency field medicine. Morphine for pain, broad-spectrum antibiotics to prevent infection, sterile bandages, and sutures for wound care for bags, and tubing to combat dehydration and blood loss. The drive to Pier 47 took 25 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more industrial and isolated. Sarah had never been to this part of the city, where abandoned warehouses and empty lots stretched along the waterfront like forgotten monuments to economic decline. The address David Shun had provided led her to a massive concrete building that looked like it hadn't seen legitimate business activity in decades. She parked behind the building as instructed and made her way to a side door that stood slightly ajar. The interior was vast and dark, lit only by shafts of early morning light filtering through broken windows high above. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space as she called out softly, "David, are you here?" "Over here," came a voice from deeper in the building. Sarah followed the sound through a maze of support pillars and debris until she found them. Jake Thompson was conscious, but clearly in significant distress. He was propped against a concrete pillar, his face pale and drawn with pain. David Shun knelt beside him, along with two other men Sarah didn't recognize. Even in the dim light, she could see fresh blood seeping through makeshift bandages on Jake's torso. "What happened?" she asked, dropping to her knees beside him and immediately beginning to assess his condition. "Safe house was compromised," David Shun explained tersely. "We had to move him before he was ready. Some of his surgical sites reopened during transport, and he's developing signs of infection." Sarah's training took over as she examined Jake's wounds. The surgical incisions from his emergency operation a week ago showed signs of inflammation and possible infection. His temperature was elevated, his pulse rapid and weak. Without proper hospital care, he was at serious risk of sepsis. "Jake," she said softly, "I need you to tell me how you're feeling. Pain level, nausea, dizziness?" His eyes focused on her with obvious effort. "Like I've been shot 20 times, he replied, managing a weak smile. "But grateful to be alive." "The infection is spreading," Sarah told David Shun after completing her examination. "He needs 4 antibiotics immediately, and these wounds need proper cleaning and resuturing. This isn't something I can handle with just the supplies I brought." "Hospital isn't an option," one of the other men said. "They've got people watching every medical facility in the city." "Then we need to set up a proper treatment area somewhere else," Sarah replied. "He needs continuous monitoring for a fluids-controlled environment. Without that, all the surgery in the world won't save him." David Shun considered this for a moment. "There's another option, but it's risky. I know a veterinarian who's helped us before. His clinic has proper equipment, and he won't ask questions." "A veterinarian?" "Military medic in Afghanistan before he went to vet school," David Shun explained. "He knows trauma medicine, and his clinic is off the radar. Jake Thompson tried to sit up straighter, wincing with the effort. "Sarah," he said, his voice hoarse but determined. "Before we go anywhere else, there's something you need to know. About why this happened, about what I discovered. Jake, you need to save your strength." "No," he interrupted. "If something happens to me, if they find us here, someone needs to know the truth." He gestured to David Chun. "Give her the files." David Chun hesitated, then pulled a waterproof case from his jacket. "These are copies of documents Jake retrieved during his mission, evidence of the trafficking network and the officials protecting it." Sarah took the case with trembling hands. "What exactly am I looking at?" "Proof that a human trafficking operation has been moving women and children through a network of safe houses for the past 3 years, Jake said, his voice growing stronger as he talked. "But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that they're not just being trafficked for labor or prostitution. Some of them are being sold to wealthy clients who want to hunt humans for sport." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Inhumans. Private estates, isolated locations, wealthy psychopaths who pay millions for the opportunity to track and kill people like animals," Jake continued. "The trafficking network provides the victims, and certain government officials provide the protection and cover up when things go wrong." Sarah opened the case and saw photographs, documents, financial records. Even at a glance, she could see names and places that would mean something to investigators. But one photograph made her stop breathing entirely. "Is this Agent Rebecca Foster?" Jake confirmed. "One of the key players in the protection network. That woman who questioned you at the hospital isn't investigating the trafficking operation. She's protecting it." The realization that she'd been face to face with someone involved in human trafficking made Sarah's stomach clench with nausea. "How many people are involved?" "At least a dozen high-level officials across multiple agencies," David Chin replied. "FBI, CIA, Department of Defense, even some local law enforcement. The network has been extremely careful to place people in positions where they can control investigations and eliminate threats." "Like Jake." "Exactly. When Jake stumbled onto evidence of the hunting activities, he became too dangerous to leave alive." Sarah looked at Jake Thompson, this wounded warrior who had risked everything to expose horrors that most people couldn't imagine. "Why didn't you just turn the evidence over to proper authorities?" "Because we couldn't determine which authorities were compromised," Jake replied. "The network reaches too high, involves too many agencies. Turning evidence over to the wrong person would just ensure it disappeared, and everyone involved got eliminated." "So what's the plan now?" David Chun exchanged looks with the other man. "We're working with a journalist who specializes in government corruption, someone with the resources and protection to publish this story in a way that can't be suppressed." "When?" "Soon. But Jake needs to survive long enough to provide testimony, and we need to keep the evidence safe until publication." Sarah made a decision that would change the rest of her life. "Then, let's get him to that veterinary clinic." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Jake Thompson was transported to DR. Kevin Walsh's veterinary clinic in the back of an unmarked van, with Sarah monitoring his condition during the drive. Dr. Walsh turned out to be a compact man in his 40s with steady hands and the calm competence of someone accustomed to life and death situations. "How bad?" he asked Sarah as they transferred Jake to an examination table in the clinic surgery room. "Infected surgical sites, possible sepsis, dehydration, and general weakness from blood loss and trauma," Sarah replied. "He needs 4 antibiotics, wound cleaning, and probably resuturing of at least 3 incision sites." Dr. Walsh examined Jake quickly and professionally. "I can handle the medical issues," he said. "But you need to understand, once I start treating him here, this clinic becomes a target. If the wrong people figure out where he is, we're all in danger. Doctor, Jake said, his voice weak but clear, I have evidence that could shut down a human trafficking network and expose government officials who are facilitating the torture and murder of innocent people. If I don't survive to tell this story, those crimes continue. Dr. Walsh studied Jake's face for a long moment, then began preparing medical equipment. Then, I guess we better make sure you survive. The treatment took 6 hours. Dr. Walsh and Sarah worked together to clean infected wounds, administer antibiotics, and restore Jake's fluid levels. Throughout the procedure, David Chun and his associates maintained security, monitoring police scanners and watching for signs of surveillance. As Jake's condition stabilized, Sarah found herself thinking about the choice she'd made. A week ago, she'd been a rookie nurse worried about her competence in handling emergency situations. Now she was part of a covert operation to expose government corruption, providing medical care to a special operations soldier in a veterinary clinic while federal agents hunted them. Sarah, Jake said during one of his more lucid moments, I need to ask you something. What? When this is over, when the story comes out, there's going to be blowback. People are going to want to know who helped me, who had access to the evidence, who can corroborate the details. Your life is never going to be the same. I know, she replied. I've thought about that. Are you prepared for what comes next? Congressional hearings, media attention, possibly witness protection if things get really dangerous. Sarah considered the question seriously. Jake, I became a nurse because I wanted to help people. I thought that meant treating injuries and illnesses, but maybe it means something bigger. Maybe sometimes helping people means standing up to powerful criminals, even when it's dangerous. Even when those criminals have badges and government authority. Especially then, Sarah replied firmly. Because if we can't trust the people who are supposed to protect us, then ordinary citizens like me have to step up. Dr. Walsh looked up from the monitoring equipment he was adjusting. Jake, your vitals are stabilizing. The antibiotics are working, and the wound cleaning has removed most of the infected tissue. You're going to make it. How long before I'm mobile? Mobile enough to travel? Maybe 48 hours if you take it easy. Mobile enough for normal activity? At least 2 weeks, possibly longer. David Chun approached the examination table with a secure phone in his hand. Jake, I just heard from our journalist contact. She's ready to publish, but she needs your testimony on record first. Video interview, detailed statement, answers to specific questions about the evidence. How soon? Tomorrow, if you're up for it. Jake looked at Sarah, then at Dr. Walsh. What's the medical risk of doing an intensive interview tomorrow? Manageable if we keep you on 4 fluids and monitor your vital signs, Dr. Walsh replied. But you'll be exhausted afterward. Do it, Jake said. The longer we wait, the more time they have to find us. The next day brought the most intense 4 hours of Sarah's life. The journalist, a woman named Maria Santos with credentials from major news organizations, arrived with a video crew and enough security to make Sarah feel like she was in the middle of a military operation. Jake Thompson, still weak but determined, provided testimony that detailed not just his own mission and discoveries, but the broader scope of the trafficking network and government protection scheme. Sarah watched him describe horrors that would haunt her dreams for years, speaking with the precise clarity of someone who understood that every word might mean the difference between justice and continued victimization. When it came time for Sarah's testimony, she found herself looking into a camera and describing the night Jake had been brought to her hospital, the FBI agents who had questioned her, and her growing understanding of the conspiracy she'd stumbled into. Why did you decide to help? Maria Santos asked her. Sarah thought for a moment before answering. because I realized that being a healthcare worker means more than just treating symptoms. Sometimes it means treating the causes of those symptoms, even when those causes are powerful people who don't want to be exposed. Were you afraid? Terrified, Sarah admitted. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I did nothing. The story broke 72 hours later across multiple news platforms simultaneously. The evidence Jake Thompson had risked his life to obtain was presented in detail, along with testimony from victims who had been rescued during raids conducted immediately after the story's publication. Agent Rebecca Foster was arrested within hours, along with 11 other federal officials. The trafficking network was dismantled in a coordinated operation involving multiple agencies, with oversight from officials whose loyalty had been verified through extensive background investigations. Jake Thompson survived to see justice served, though his recovery would take months. Sarah Chun found herself in the national spotlight as the nurse who had risked everything to help expose government corruption. But she handled the attention with the same quiet determination she'd shown throughout the crisis. 6 months later, Sarah was working at a different hospital in a different city, her identity protected through a witness security program. Jake Thompson had returned to active duty with a new special operations unit focused specifically on human trafficking investigations. Dr. Martinez had been quietly reassigned to a federal medical facility where his experience with sensitive cases was valued and protected. The abandoned warehouse where Sarah had first treated Jake's infected wounds was torn down and replaced with a memorial park dedicated to victims of human trafficking. A small plaque near the entrance read, "In honor of ordinary people who refuse to look away when confronted with extraordinary evil." Sarah visited the memorial once, on the anniversary of the night that changed her life. She stood in the park where a warehouse had once hidden wounded warriors and dangerous secrets, thinking about courage and choice and the responsibility that comes with knowledge. A voice behind her said, most people would have just walked away." She turned to find Jake Thompson, fully recovered and looking healthier than she'd ever seen him. "Most people don't become nurses," she replied. "We're trained to help, even when it's dangerous." "Especially when it's dangerous," Jake corrected with a smile. "Sarah, I never properly thanked you for what you did. Not just the medical care, but the courage to stand up when it mattered. You would have done the same thing. Maybe, but you actually did it." Jake looked around the memorial park, his expression growing serious. "There are other operations, other networks that need exposing. People who could use someone with your skills and your willingness to do what's right." Sarah considered his words. Her new life was quiet, safe, and completely removed from the shadows she'd briefly inhabited. But somewhere out there, other victims needed help, other conspiracies needed exposing, other wounded warriors needed someone willing to provide care without asking too many questions about official authorizations. "Are you asking me to leave my safe new life and go back to being terrified on a regular basis?" she asked. "I'm asking if you'd consider using your skills to help people who can't get help anywhere else," Jake replied. "The pay is terrible, the hours are unpredictable, and there's always a chance that powerful people will want you dead. But you get to be part of something that actually matters. You get to help people who have nowhere else to turn, expose criminals who think they're untouchable, and make sure that the truth comes out even when powerful people want it buried." Sarah looked around the memorial park one more time, thinking about the choice that had brought her here and the choice she was being offered now. A year ago, she'd been a rookie nurse who wanted to help people. Now she was being invited to help people in ways she'd never imagined, confronting dangers she'd never anticipated, making differences that could affect thousands of lives. "When do I start?" she asked. Jake Thompson's smile was answer enough. Some people are born for quiet lives, safe routines, and predictable challenges. Others discover that their true calling lies in the shadows, where ordinary courage meets extraordinary need, and where a willingness to help can change the world in ways that will never appear in any official record. Sarah Chun had learned that saving one life could lead to saving many lives, and that sometimes the most important nursing you'll ever do happens far from any hospital, with patients whose names you can never know and whose gratitude you can never officially receive. But in the end, that knowledge was worth all the fear, all the risk, and all the uncertainty that came with choosing to stand up when it would have been safer to look away. Because some choices define not just what you do, but who you are, and Sarah Chun had discovered exactly who she was meant to be.